Hello and welcome to the Development Breakout Session. My name is Ashley Schultz, and I am a Recreation and Conservation Advisor in the Community Parks and Recreation section. Our section includes Sherry Motter, the Section Chief, Beth Helterbrand, the Small Community Program Specialist, and 5 Project Managers, Rick Bogart, Olivia Braun, Ethan Strickler, Trish Nudek, and myself. We manage park and recreation projects throughout the Commonwealth. Our hope is that this presentation gives you the information and guidance necessary to develop a competitive grant application. Thank you for taking time to listen to this session on development projects. The goal of this breakout session will be to build on some of the elements explained during the general presentation. We will also provide you with more detailed information on how to develop a good project, prepare a competitive grant application, and enhance your community park. Let's talk more about the goals of a community park and recreation development grant. This type of grant can focus on the development of a completely new park, further the development of an existing park, or rehabilitating an existing park site or facility in your park. Please double check that the park development breakout session is best suited for your project. We will not be addressing trail or river development projects during this presentation, only parks. Information about park planning, trails, rivers, land acquisition, and partnership applications is offered in separate breakout sessions, and they will be available to you on DCNR's YouTube channel. The map on this slide will help you determine which regional advisor covers your county or region and displays their contact information. This map is also available on the DCNR Grants website. As mentioned in the general session, your DCNR regional advisor will be a critical partner as you move your project forward. Working with your DCNR regional advisor will allow you to talk through your ideas and review any potential site constraints, such as floodplains, waterways, easements, etc., as well as give you an opportunity to share insight into your community's specific needs, issues, and concerns. Applicants that discuss their project with their DCNR regional advisor typically submit higher quality applications. Before you start an application, you need to determine 1. Is this a viable project? 2. What community support exists? And 3. What is the source of the financial match? Please reach out to your regional advisor as soon as possible so they can schedule site visits and hold project discussions with you. The goal is for them to help you identify any issues or challenges up front, develop a full and complete project, and provide guidance on how to submit a competitive application. The grant application period begins on January 16, 2024, and closes on April 3, 2024. That's only 11 weeks. Start early to develop your project, contact your regional advisor, and work on your application. Park development and planning grant applications compete against each other for the funding available within their respective region. Grant funds are awarded to projects in score order, highest to lowest, and are dispersed until all funds are depleted. All applications are reviewed by the DCNR regional advisor and their counterpart within central office in Harrisburg. Scoring is based on your written responses to each criteria question, the ready-to-go checklist items, and the consistency between the proposed scope of work, the detailed budget, and the site development drawings. We will talk in more detail about these items in the upcoming slides. As a reminder, our grant program is very competitive. Our primary funding sources for development projects include the Keystone Recreation Park and Conservation Fund, the Environmental Stewardship Fund, or Growing Greener, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is a federal funding source. This funding is traditionally available for larger projects over $500,000 in total project costs. Your regional advisor will help you determine if this funding source works for your project. Our park development priorities are rehabilitation of existing parks, and recreation for all. This includes improving physical access, such as proximity and transportation to the ADA-compliant facilities, building close-to-home recreation opportunities that serve all segments of the population, promoting cultural and language access through relevant programming, fostering intergenerational opportunities, focusing on parks with underserved populations, and promoting practices and programming that are relevant, engaging, and consider the following: race and ethnicity, gender and gender identity, sexual orientation, age, military status, nationality and citizenship status, physical ability, cognitive ability, religious affiliation, socioeconomic status, and those facing trauma and addiction. Let's talk more about the park rehabilitation and development projects. These typically involve more complex and larger scale improvements. Rehabilitation projects are within an existing park and seek to improve the amenities or update them to meet the community's needs. Development projects are projects that develop a new park site or a new phase of an existing park. Eligible applicants are municipalities, counties, authorities, council of governments, conservation districts, school districts, and 501c3 nonprofits. Eligible projects are recreation and conservation facilities that must be open to the public. Funding priorities are rehabilitation and recreation for all, as we discussed earlier. Grant awards range from $100,000 to $250,000. The match requirement is dollar for dollar. For example, a $250,000 grant award will require $250,000 in match. The Small Community Grant Program is limited to municipalities only, and they must have a population of 5,000 or less. Typically, these projects are much smaller in scale, such as a small playground unit or a pavilion, and on properties that are less than 5 acres. These sites must also be open to the public. Small community development project applications are ranked statewide, not regionally. Similar to the park rehabilitation and development projects, the funding priorities remain rehabilitation and recreation for all. In recent years, the Small Community Program has experienced a few changes. DCNR has worked to allow a range for the allocation request, with the hope of helping smaller communities cover the increasing costs of a park development project. The minimum grant award is $60,000 and requires $30,000 in matching funds. The maximum grant award is $100,000 and requires $70,000 in matching funds. The first $30,000 of the grant allocation does not have a match requirement. However, grant funds greater than $30,000 require a dollar-for-dollar match. The $30,000 of the grant award that does not require match is broken down as follows. $10,000 is earmarked for professional service costs only. The remaining $20,000 is to be used for materials, equipment, and/or supplies. DCNR does accept non-cash match values, although specific details must be shown in the project budget. Cash match is strongly encouraged with the rising costs of construction. We also encourage you to request the maximum grant amount to cover cost increases. Over 70% of Pennsylvania communities have a population less than 5,000 and are eligible for a small community grant program. Your small community project must meet the DCNR size, scope of work, limitations, and proposed budget. If you are interested in learning more about the Small Community Grant Program, please reach out to your regional advisor before you apply. This will help guide your budget and application. The Ready-to-Go checklist is a very important part of your grant application. When combined, the 7 ready-to-go items delineated here will provide a clear picture of your project and how you plan to make it a reality. A copy of this checklist can be found in the grant portal. We will review each of these in greater detail. Remember that the more detailed information you can provide with the application, the better. Applications that lack any of the ready-to-go items are deemed not ready to go and will not be considered for funding. Pre-planning and preparation for your grant application is essential to be competitive. The grant application process requires engagement with your community and public officials. You must have public support and consensus on the community needs and desires. It also necessitates that you have secured the required match. Let's cover the first ready-to-go item: ownership and/or control. The grantee must own or control the park property proposed for development. If the grantee leases the property, the lease must be established for at least 25 years, which is considered the useful life of most installed developed park facilities. Additionally, there may not be any reversionary clauses or termination agreements within the lease that may turn over the control of the property to a third party. At the time of application, a copy of any leases must be provided. At a minimum, you must supply a draft lease agreement for review and consideration. It will be reviewed by DCNR, and you must be willing to make changes as necessary to meet any grant terms and conditions. The next three ready-to-go items listed, scope of work, budget, and site development drawing, must be closely connected as you build your grant application. We'll be discussing each of these ready-to-go items in greater detail in subsequent slides to emphasize the importance of maintaining consistency between these items. Project site must be open to the public. DCNR grant funds are generated from statewide funding sources. All park facilities developed using these funds must be open to the public. Secured match, eligible cash and non-cash match information. The term secured match is when the applicant has the cash match in hand or in the bank ready to be used for the project. The source of that match can be cash budgeted in the municipal budget or from another eligible grant source. Most state, county, and federal funds will match our funding. Non-cash match can also be used. See page 3, number 8 of DCNR's Frequently Asked Questions document or our FAQ for more information. With the acceptance of DCNR funds comes the expectation to follow our processes and procedures. As an important reminder, without the required information from the ready-to-go checklist, your project could be deemed not ready to go and will not be considered for funding. As mentioned earlier, this slide is a good example of showing consistency between the scope of work, detailed budget, and site development drawing. At the bottom of the slide is an example scope of work written for a DCNR funded project. It specifically identifies each amenity proposed as part of the project. For the purposes of this example, we are looking at the required safety surfacing, highlighted in blue, and ADA access in yellow. When put side by side, you can easily find the required safety surfacing and ADA access listed in the budget and locate these same scope elements on the site development drawing. All projects require ADA accessibility and connectivity to all areas of the park. This includes ADA parking, accessible routes from the parking area to the site, and to all proposed amenities. Please plan and budget for all required ADA improvements. There are 3 ready-to-go items, the project scope of work, the site development drawing, and budget, that must demonstrate consistency and convey interconnectivity. The project activity should be succinctly defined in the scope of work, labeled, and illustrated on the site development drawing, and itemized in your budget. The application reviewer will be looking for a common theme and how these 3 ready-to-go items are specified in your project application. Any inconsistencies between these 3 items will create confusion for those reviewing the application and could adversely impact the application score. Remember, although your regional advisor may be familiar with your project, their central office counterpart who is also scoring your application may not be. Chances are the central office reviewer will know nothing about your project and they will rely on your application to provide those details. Their understanding of your project may be fully reliant on the information you provide. When developing your project, try to make it simple and realistic. Concentrate on a single park site in your community. Avoid trying to address multiple sites. As you write the scope of work, be sure to include the name of the park, the municipality, and county. You will need to identify exactly what you will be constructing as part of the project. This slide provides examples of potential amenities, such as ADA accessible walkways, ADA parking, pavilion, benches, water fountain, etc. All amenities proposed should result in the improvement of a specific location within your park. Do not include work elements that are not in alignment with the project scope of work, budget, or site development drawing, and do not incorporate work elements that have already been constructed prior to your application. Remember that the project must create a complete and functional area. It should concentrate on one specific location within the park. We do not recommend proposing disconnected park elements scattered throughout a site. Please note that the pool or water-related amenities and indoor recreation facilities require a feasibility study and/or structural assessment prior to applying for a development or a rehabilitation grant. Next is a detailed budget. This budget template, shown on the slide, is available for download from the grant portal. Please note that this is only an example. We recommend that you work with a consultant when developing your detailed budget to ensure current estimates are being used. A different budget template from your consultant is acceptable, although it must provide an itemization of materials, equipment, supplies, and labor. Remember to assign estimated quantities for materials and labor if applicable. Make sure to round your costs off to the nearest hundred to simplify numbers and make them easier to work with. You'll want to make sure your budget identifies all amenities being constructed and itemizes labor costs and materials. Refer to how the example budget itemizes the accessible play area, item A, 1 through 5, accessible parking space and accessible walkway, item B, 1 through 5. This is a good example to demonstrate a detailed budget. Also, clearly identify all non-cash match sources. This helps application reviewers understand the types of match planned for the project and to determine the amount of grant funding being proposed. Item E3 in the budget shows an example of a non-cash match source. All professional services must also be included. For small community projects, remember to allocate $10,000 for professional service costs in your budget. These can include design, permitting, bid preparation, construction oversight, legal fees, etc. In this example, they are included in item G1. Clearly identify your ADA improvements and any green and sustainable practices for climate resiliency. Keep in mind, the timeline for anticipated DCNR grant funds. The application period closes in spring 2024. DCNR typically announces in the fall. Grant agreements are anticipated January 2025, and the earliest you could potentially start construction on your project would be in the spring-summer of 2025. That's nearly 18 months later. Make sure your budget line items reflect cost adjustments due to supply and demand, inflation, and other factors over time that could raise the cost of labor and materials. There are two major cost categories for DCNR grant projects: professional services and construction costs. Professional services costs are costs incurred for survey work, design consultants, and solicitor attorney fees. Construction costs are costs incurred for the materials, equipment, and labor to physically develop the site. Examples include stone, asphalt, playground equipment, safety surfacing, signage, labor costs, and more. There are two major match categories: cash and non-cash value. Match values are subject to competitive public bidding requirements, cooperative purchasing programs, and PA prevailing wages or Davis-Bacon wage rates, depending on the source. Remember, the application submission should be accompanied by a formal cash and/or non-cash match commitment letter. The amount of cash match and the source must be provided in the application. Please refer to the main DCNR grant presentation for more information. The Park Site Development Drawing Checklist can be downloaded from the DCNR Grants Customer Service Portal. A professionally completed site development drawing is critical to the success of your project application. The site development drawing submitted as part of your grant application requires preparation by a licensed design professional. An important distinction: the application site development drawing does not need to be sealed by a licensed design professional. The drawing must include all the items outlined in both the written scope of work and the detailed budget. It is essential that we understand the project site location and placement of amenities to evaluate whether the proposed project is feasible, reasonable, and within the parameters of the grant program. We need to see both existing conditions and proposed site features to be funded with the grant. Show the entire park boundary so we can understand how your project would fit into the larger park site. Showing only the limit of disturbance on the site development plan will not provide a clear picture of your project to those reviewing the application. Please bear in mind, aerial images from websites such as Google Earth, Google Maps, or MapQuest will not be accepted. Sample site development drawing. This sample clearly identifies the amenities included in the scope of work. Playground equipment and the required safety surfacing is shown in yellow shading. There's an ADA parking stall with a wheel stop and an ADA access aisle in purple shading, an ADA pedestrian walkway, 2 benches and seating areas, a DCNR funding acknowledgement sign also in purple shading. This drawing also shows the meets and bounds or property line descriptions of the entire park site in the bottom right of the screen. Depending on your site, you may need to include other site features, such as waterways, floodplains, and other man-made features. You need to understand the grant timeline. The grant application deadline is April 3, 2024 at 4 p.m. It will take 6 to 9 months before grant recipients are announced, and then several more months until grant agreements are finalized. Realistically, a project start date will likely be at least a full year after the application was submitted. Start your application now. You need time to pull the required information together for the application. This fall is the perfect time to begin reaching out to your regional advisor, working on your project, and preparing your application. Please do not delay and submit a last-minute application. Proper preparation and planning results in a more competitive application for our limited grant funds. As we near the end of this presentation, we want to reiterate some tips for success. Contact your regional advisor as soon as possible to discuss your project and develop a simple and realistic scope of work. Engage a professional design consultant to help you develop your detailed budget and site development drawing. Remember that ADA access throughout the project is required. If you need additional guidance on how to answer the criteria questions, please review the general session presentation and use the help text within the grant application. Refer to page 7 of the FAQ document for additional information about the 2010 ADA standards for accessible design. Consider providing a few color photographs or even a video of your project site with your application. These could help give DCNR application reviewers a better understanding of the needs of the proposed project. While photos or videos alone are not enough to satisfy our application requirements, they can be used to support your application. Remember that this development breakout presentation and the other grant-related presentations will be available on DCNR's YouTube channel. We encourage you to revisit these presentations as you start your application. Should your organization be the recipient of a future DCNR grant award, please keep in mind that with the acceptance of DCNR funds comes the requirement to follow our competitive processes and procedures. The award of a grant does not necessarily mean that all proposed amenities are eligible for DCNR grant funds. Please be willing to work with DCNR to help you build a simple and financially feasible project. As part of your grant application, there is a requirement to pass a resolution in which the grantee is bound by DCNR's grant terms and conditions. The grant terms and conditions refer to applicable laws, including but not limited to procurement and ADA requirements. We strongly encourage you to review both the resolution page of the grant application and DCNR's grant terms and conditions, specifically Article 3, compliance with applicable statutes, regulations, and other requirements. These two documents are linked in our Frequently Asked Questions FAQ document. It is important to review the FAQ document for more information about our grant requirements and policies. The FAQ document can be found at the following website address: https://apps.dcnr.pa.gov/grants. After you enter the website address, in the green ribbon at the top of the page, click on Grant Opportunities. Next, click on the blue button labeled More Info for the Park Rehabilitation and Development Grant Program. Then, under Guidance Documents on the right side of the screen, click on Frequently Asked Questions FAQ. Remember, when accessing the DCNR Grant Opportunities page, both Park Rehabilitation and Development and Small Community Grant applications must be accessed and submitted through the Park Rehabilitation and Development Grant Program. Make sure to review the grant program timeline from application to post-award to understand when announcements are made and the earliest a project could begin. Get a head start on your grant application now, and remember to reach out to your DCNR Regional Advisor for guidance. Thank you, and we look forward to working with you.